The biggest Syracuse recruit in over 2 decades, five-star wide receiver Calvin Russell, committed to Syracuse on Saturday night. And we're joined by Brian Smith, Locked On recruiting expert, to give a nice scouting report, what you need to expect from the five-star wide receiver.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in a Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, we are joined by Locked On recruiting expert, host of the new Portal podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, Brian Smith, to talk all about Calvin Russell, the new five-star wide receiver to commit to Syracuse University. We're going to get his scouting report as well as the recruiting impact this has around the country. All that and more here on today's show. But before we get to everything, today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. So I want to get something out there real quick for all of you. You may be seeing a video that's been circulating now on YouTube a little bit because about a year ago around this time, myself and Brian, we were doing a podcast together. And we made a bet about Calvin Russell committing to Syracuse, where if Calvin Russell actually committed to Syracuse football, Brian would buy me a steak dinner. If he doesn't commit to Syracuse, Brian gets nothing. So it was I couldn't lose from this bet. So here's the deal though, guys. Brian will owe me a steak dinner in about 5 months. Because technically the bet was he has to sign with Syracuse ultimately. And trust me, we will get to that later on in the show, whether or not he's actually going to sign with Syracuse. That is very, very important and ultimately what really matters here. But before that, let's get to the scouting report. Brian, you've seen this player play live in person. You've interviewed him. Can you tell us, how does Calvin Russell play? Who does he remind you of?
He's a very unique player because he's at least 6'5". He's a real skinny kid. He's got a frame that he could probably weigh 225 if he wanted to, but he's a kid that's really thin right now, but he's not just a deep threat. He's fast. Like, there's no doubt he has deep speed. He's the rare guy that at 6'5" makes guys miss, more like a slot receiver. I was very surprised at how well he moves laterally. He still has a lot of things he needs to work on with his release and how he stems, and he gets to the point where he's on top of guys and he makes sure that he separates that way. But his length, his competitiveness, his hand-eye coordination, all that combined with his lateral ability after he has the football is rare. And that's why he's a big-time recruit, and 24/7 has him as a five-star.
How soon of an impact do you think he can make at the next level?
Oh, I think he'll make one as a freshman at Syracuse. Now, again, technically he's got a long way to go, but he plays at Miami Northwestern with Teddy Bridgewater. The NFL quarterback is the head coach. I think he'll get better between now and then. He just has to clean up technical stuff. How much he figures that out, he could start as a freshman there by the end of his freshman year. Wouldn't surprise me. But at the least, still have packages for him. Trim down the playbook, certain things where they go maybe against, what they expect to be the second team defense or other teams coming out early on, but I bet he starts before the end of his freshman year if everything's just right.
I mean, what do you think of a potential wide receiver core in 2026? Obviously, a lot can change between now and then, but Calvin Russell with Daryl Gill, and who knows what happens with Jonte Cook, but he's got multiple years of eligibility. But that's the trio of wide receivers right now for Syracuse football in 2026. I mean, what do you think of that just off the top?
Well, that's a ridiculous amount of speed. That's, NFL talent at all three spots. But my guess is somebody besides Calvin will start the year as the starter. Calvin will work his way in, but it's like anything else. If you've got the ball of clay to work with, you can mold it into something. So I imagine Fran probably won't have a hard time getting a good receiver out of the portal between now and then either. mean, Syracuse throws it around, so that's not going to change.
Aside from the statting report here, again, you've talked to Calvin, you've interviewed him, you've seen him play. Why did he choose Syracuse? Because he could have gone anywhere. This is someone who's ranked as high as 21st in the country. His Final Four, including Syracuse, was Oregon, Florida State, and the runner-up was Michigan. He also had offers from, again, everywhere in the country. Why Syracuse?
Fran Brown and the staff, they prioritize kids early and build relationships, and it's meaningful. They'll set times for kids to speak with them every day. They just outwork people. They certainly outworked a lot of the programs that you just mentioned, and there's some of those schools are doing well, like Notre Dame and Georgia and a few other schools, maybe just one more step up, but Syracuse could end up with a top 15 class. Did you or I really think there was a chance of that? I mean, it's not out of the question they could. I mean, I'd have laughed. You probably would have too.
I still think it's unlikely they can get up to 15. I think if we can talk briefly here about the ripple effect, if they can flip a guy like Tedarius Hughes from Florida State, maybe you can get into the top 15, and we can talk about that later on in the show as far as the impact nationally, but maybe that's the way they get into the top 15 is flipping Tedarius Hughes. But my goal for 2026 has always been top 30 because, and a year ago, you probably would have laughed at me. Top 30 for Syracuse? That doesn't seem like really like that's true, but
top 50 would have been my objective there. That would have been my guess.
But here's the thing, Brian, is that Syracuse on 24/7 Sports in Fran Brown's first year was 37th. In 2025, they dip a little bit, but they're 43rd, and they get a kid like Demetrius Samuel to commit to Syracuse. So I said, hey, next step. You want to go try to top 30? Like, try it. Let's see what happens. And now you get a guy like Calvin Russell. I think this all but assures that they are going to have a top 30 class in the country here. I mean, Brian, any last thoughts on how Calvin Russell, though, specifically as a player, before we move on to the recruiting impact in general?
This is a guy I think they will use at multiple spots, and he will be a deep threat from day one. If there's nothing else that he will do, and his nickname is Gump, by the way, get used to hearing that nickname. Gump will go deep, and he will be a guy they throw screens to, and it's just going to allow him to have the ball in his hands. It won't be complex, but other teams won't do much with it. He's really, really difficult to guard.
I mean, I think he would fit pretty well into Syracuse's offense. It's an offense that it's a lot of short and intermediate routes. It does rely on receivers' ability to run after the catch. And if you're already a 6'5", long wingspan wide receiver and you can run after the catch, I think you're going to thrive in a Syracuse football offense. Hopefully it's still under Jeff Nixon, and hopefully Fran Brown is still there, because we'll talk about this in the next segment, in the next couple of segments. I mean, Syracuse is going to have to pony up to keep Fran Brown, because he just put the entire nation on notice by getting Syracuse's first 5-star player in over 20 years. That is crazy.
It's great. I think it's great for college football.
We are joined by Brian Smith, host of the Locked On Portal podcast. It's a new podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Be sure to check it out when you're done watching or listening to this podcast. Brian has already done a 16-minute podcast breaking down Calvin Russell and Syracuse football. Coming up, we'll talk more about the impact this recruitment has on the rest of college football. So stick with us here on Locked On Syracuse. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? I know I have. I did it a couple of days ago, and that's part of the reason why my voice may be just a little bit off right now. Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands, and that's exactly where Gametime comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, and even invite a bigger group to come with you. Gametime makes it all possible. Gametime makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch, and they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Gametime is the official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB, making it easy to browse the app for an exciting MLB game. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. This is Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and we are joined by Brian Smith, Locked On recruiting expert and host of the Portal Podcast. We are breaking down five-star wide receiver Calvin Russell's commitment to Syracuse. We went over a scouting report and briefly why Calvin Russell ultimately chose to not sign yet. Hold on, I almost prodded myself there. Chose to verbally commit with Syracuse football. So, Brian, this is a very broad question that I am about to ask you here, and there's so many different avenues we can go with this. How does Syracuse getting Calvin Russell change the college football recruiting landscape?
Couple of reasons. Number one, he plays at Miami Northwestern, one of the most tradition-rich programs, not only in the Sunshine State, but all of prep football across the nation. That's going to catch people's attention, and he's a kid that's recruited by everybody, as you noted, Oregon, Michigan, you name a school they offered. And that also means it's a young man that probably going to be able to bring some kids with it. However, as I noted on my show today on the Portal Podcast, Syracuse is pretty close to full at the end. If you know what I mean, like when they got 26 commits or something like that, they're right around there. This is a kid that will probably have more of an impact on 27, 28, 29. It's cool to go to Syracuse, that kind of thing, much to Mario Cristobal's chagrin. But it's, again, the program he comes from, the area he comes from. I went off the top of my head, they got like 7 kids from Florida, like 6 from PA. They're getting kids out of states where they got big-time football programs, and they're still doing really well with it. And now the next step, because of getting Gump and some of the other kids they have in this class, can they get 1 or 2 more, maybe from Florida this year? I think they can. Tedarius Hughes, we can talk about him momentarily. He's a kid that's his teammate, committed to the Florida State Seminoles, a big-time safety, who one day I remember you mentioned to me, hey, he just posted on X that he's standing there in Syracuse gear, just randomly, posted it on X. Not a good sign if you're a Knoll. But at the same time, there's other kids too. They all know him, whether they want to admit it or not, and it's going to drive traffic towards the Syracuse recruiting staff. It's just inevitable. But again, more likely for 27, 28, 29, because those classes are empty right now, you have the ability to get more. But I think it changes the perception of what Fran Brown and his staff can do. And that's awesome. Like, college football is known for being topsy-turvy, for up and down. It's been a minute since Syracuse was viable more than 1 or 2 seasons, like 80s, 90s. They had some really good football teams. They were very competitive. Donovan McNabb, et cetera. I remember they went to Michigan one time and cleaned their clock. This is something that has not been around for a while, but this is how you get there. And I think he will bring other recruits with him just by osmosis.
I think, honestly, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. It opens up people's eyes. From South Florida, like, you know, Syracuse football, I know it's up north, but hey, it's a good football program, and it can develop you, and it can send guys to the National Football League. And if you're an elite player, regardless of the state, you should at least consider Syracuse football. You're not going to get everyone, just like Ohio State doesn't get everyone, just like Michigan doesn't get everyone. As we just saw with Calvin Russell, Alabama, Georgia, they don't get every single player, but almost every single elite recruit is going to consider those type of programs. And when you're Syracuse and you get a guy like Calvin Russell, other players are going to give you a look. They're going to give you a listen. They're going to hear you out. Why did he go to Syracuse? Maybe I should watch them one day. I'm a freshman or sophomore in high school. I should watch them one day on a Saturday and see what's going on there. Maybe pay a little bit of attention to them. I want to hit on this topic here because I did have a couple of comments in the comments section of my reaction podcast talking about how, hey, it's great that Syracuse got Calvin Russell, but it's only a verbal commitment. What does that mean? So I'll throw it over to you. What is the magnitude of Syracuse getting a verbal commitment mean when we're still months away from signing day? Signing day isn't until December. I'm not getting a steak dinner from you unless he actually signs in December.
Basically, the magnitude is right now, it's just good posture It's good media coverage, but it is not binding. There's no legal part of it. Now, if he signs some kind of NIL deal, that gets into the whole states and all that stuff. That's a whole nother animal. I don't know what that means. But as far as his binding commitment, there isn't one. Like verbal doesn't mean anything in college football recruiting. So he has to sign in December. That being the case, like as long as this recruitment took, I would say there's a pretty good chance that he's going to go to Syracuse, because I don't think you would make that commitment being where Calvin's from unless you really wanted to make the leap. That's a big leap of faith. Like South Florida kids, they struggle in North Florida in the winter sometimes. Like it's ridiculous. I'm not kidding. So those are the kinds of kids that if you're going to make that leap, you got to really be sure. He's been communicating with Syracuse for a long time. So I think it'll stick. And the NIL package is reportedly very good. I've heard different numbers. I don't know what it is. I would only know if I heard it from him directly, and I'm not going to ask Gump what his numbers are. That's not my business. So I think they did a good job of getting enough money for him. I think the Pena situation probably is one of the reasons they came up with it. That's a guess of mine. But I think he's going to stick. But enjoy it for now, regardless, because this is going to have very positive impact on the Syracuse football program.
You're right. And also, I touched on it in my reaction podcast and what I said, because I wanted to get ahead of this, because I know that we're still like 5 months away from signing day. I wanted to get ahead of it. And I said, imagine if he had committed to Michigan on Saturday night. Do you think there would be any chance that Syracuse would flip him from Michigan? If he commits to Oregon, what are the odds that Syracuse flips him from Oregon? Or even to a lesser extent, Florida State? Like, it ain't easy. Wouldn't you just rather you'll take the verbal commitment and take your chances on trying to hold on to him when Fran Brown, since he has taken over, has a hold on rate at about 90% anyway. So take your chances, take the verbal commitment, be happy, be excited. It's a great time to be a Syracuse football fan. And when signing day comes, and we'll worry about it then. And hopefully this commitment will last. And based on what you're saying, I think it will. And I also want to get ahead of this right now. I do see that there is a number circulating on social media. I'm not going to say the exact number, but that is not from a credible source. That is all I'm going to say on that. It is some random burner account reporting a number. I have not seen an actual credible one say, this is the number, like we saw from Texas Tech, where we saw a credible report of someone what he actually got. All right, I just want to throw that out there. We don't know what Calvin Russell's NIL number is, and I'll be quite honest with you. I want the commitment, so I don't really care what it is. I'll be honest with you on that. But coming up here, Brian, we're going to discuss what's next for Syracuse football and maybe the potential of flipping his teammate, Tedarius Hughes. That's coming up next on Locked On Syracuse. This is Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer. We're joined by Brian Smith, host of the Locked On Portal podcast and recruiting expert. And hey, since you've made it this far already in the podcast, if you can just do us all a huge favor, all right? You're already on Locked On Syracuse right now, so if you can just hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, it helps the channel grow and reach all Syracuse Orange fans. And if, hey, you must be really interested in football recruiting, well, Brian Smith does a podcast every single day talking about football recruiting. It's not just Syracuse, it's around the country. So you're going to also want to check out his podcast when you're done watching and listening to this one. Locked On Portal Podcast on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Hit that like and subscribe button for Brian. So more about the recruiting impact now of Calvin Russell choosing Syracuse football here. Now, the Orange do have a Miami Northwestern commit actually in 2025, and he was at Calvin Russell's commitment party. Darius Booby Johnson, a true freshman for Syracuse in 2025. There was another player that was at Calvin Russell's commitment party, and he is currently a Florida State commit. And he has taken an official visit to Syracuse football, as well as that random cryptic social media post one day in Syracuse gear. And I'm talking about four-star defensive back Tedarius Hughes, who's also in the class of 2026 with Calvin Russell. So, Brian, how much of an impact do you think Calvin Russell's commitment has on a single teammate like a guy like Tedarius Hughes?
It can depend on the person, but like Tedarius committed to the Knowles real early. But he's always been looking at other schools. Miami and other schools have recruited him. I think it'll have some. Miami kids tend to always take visits and stuff anyway. They're always one of the last to make decisions final. It's just the history of that city. So I think it'll be impactful because I'm sure that he's going to try to get him to come up to a game. I don't know what game Calvin wants to go to this fall, but I'm sure he'll go to one of them for Syracuse. It's a home game. And he'll probably get Tedarius to go with him. That's the deal, man. You already got one kid that you mentioned on campus, and you also have a kid on the campus at Miami Northwestern that's committed, that's an elite player. That can't hurt. So, and by the way, all those public school kids, they all know each other down there. Miami Northwestern, Carroll City, doesn't matter which one, Palmetto, they all know each other. I would imagine there's a pretty good chance that they'll have an impact with other kids too that we're not even talking about today. So that's also beneficial to the Cuse.
Okay, so that's Tedarius Hughes here. There's another question that I want to ask you, and I probably should have asked it earlier here in the podcast. Calvin Russell never actually officially visited Syracuse. Did you know that? He took.
Well, I do now. I know he took several.
He took 4 unofficial visits, and including the Syracuse spring game over many other schools. He took official visits to pretty much every one of his finalists except for Syracuse, and yet he chose Syracuse, meaning that Syracuse still has an official visit with him during the football season this upcoming year. How often does something like that happen, especially with this elite of a recruit where they commit to a school without ever officially visiting campus?
I don't remember the last one, but it's usually a local deal where you pretty much know where you're going to go. You might take 1 or 2 visits and you decide you're not going to those schools, and it's just the obvious. You go ahead and commit to the home state school and you're just waiting for the big game to take your OB. But this is the opposite, so it's really rare because he's the out-of-state kid. I don't remember the last one like that.
That's crazy because you study football recruiting every single day. You're obviously very, very knowledgeable. You're the host of the Locked On Portal podcast, and you also find it, I guess, just bizarre. Like, he didn't officially visit at all, and yet he chose a verbal commitment to Syracuse University in a second-year head coach. I guess that's just what makes this even more mind-boggling. He never officially visited campus over the summer. He went to Florida. He went to Florida State, I think. Yeah, he did go to Florida State. He went to Oregon. He went to Michigan. That was his final visit, was in Michigan. You tweeted out, don't be surprised if he commits to LSU after that LSU visit. And yet Fran Brown, right? It's got to be just Fran Brown. I seriously don't know how he did it, but congratulations to Fran Brown and Syracuse football. Brian, any last thoughts on Calvin Russell?
One last thought is you're going to enjoy him from day one. I'm just going to leave it at that.
What's his character like?
Real good kid, very talkative, very polite, very energetic, outgoing. Everybody likes being around Gump.
Well, that's awesome to hear. That is Brian Smith, host of the Locked On Portal podcast. Sorry, it's a little bit of a tongue twister right there, but I eventually got it right, and I've said it enough here already on this podcast. Be sure to check him out on all social media platforms and on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. This is Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer. Thank you for making it to this point of the podcast. We will be back tomorrow discussing more about Calvin Russell and how Calvin Russell elevates Syracuse football recruiting in the short term and in the long term. Spoiler alert, next year, the expectation for Syracuse football recruiting under Fran Brown, assuming that he stays, right? Because Syracuse is going to have to extend him. It's going to be even higher than what it is right now. But hey, best place to be is when expectations are high. As a famous head coach once said of the New York Jets, Rex Ryan over on Hard Knocks. Brian, thank you so much for taking the time. We will be back tomorrow discussing more Calvin Russell.